who do agree with him, up to a point. He maintains, rightly so, that the position of the chief rabbi is essentially a stifling one. That is to say, if I understood him correctly, the very position itself de facto restricts your ability to be as effective as you might otherwise be capable of being. And there is a definitive truth to this, not just, I should stress, in the position of the chief rabbi, but frankly in virtually most appointed positions. As somebody once said, any kind of appointed leadership is, by definition, not real leadership. And I think there is some practical truth to that, because once formally appointed to the position, you are invariably limited by the politics, you're limited by the philosophies of those responsible for the appointment. There has to be an inevitable slant in some of the decision-making process, and yes, it has to be said that that becomes compounded multifold when it's not even an election, but purely a selection. You become entirely beholden to those who selected you. Does that mean that we shouldn't have a chief rabbi? Well, I'll be honest with you, and I'll tell you that I've sat on the fence on this one for a long time. In fact, I noticed there was an email that went around to the community the other day about tonight, giving us Rabbi Boteach's perspective, giving us Sally's perspective, and then it says, Rabbi Schochet, we don't know yet what he holds. And I say to you, not just me, but to one extent or another, those who were directly involved in the recruitment process are not entirely sure whether this is something that we should be advocating going forward. Some of them grappled with this for all different kinds of reasons that I won't get into right now. You speak to some people and they'll tell you that they think we've pretty much outgrown the position. Many others, maybe even a majority, will insist that, no, we still need a focal point of some sort, not because that's what they're used to, not because it's Anglo-Jewish tradition, but frankly, and this is true to be said, that Anglo-Jewry has always managed to punch above its weight. And that is unquestionably attributable in no small measure to the office of the chief rabbi. So on balance, I would say yes, that a chief rabbinate remains a necessity. But note I say rabbinate rather than rabbi because I believe the office is vital. I'm not sure it should retain its current structure of necessarily being reduced to just one man. And Rabbi Boteach is actually not the first to lament about what he perceives as weak leadership in this country either. No more or less than perhaps, frankly, in America or other countries. Former Zionist Federation Chairman Andrew Balcom used his valedictory speech to bemoan what he described, weakest pro-Israel leadership the community has had in many years. Or to put it in his words, Israel is not the mainstream issue for the Jewish leadership, nor the Board of Deputies. All I see is apologies. He's right. And I've lamented this point for the longest time, and let's be honest, it's not just about Israel, it's about many things to which too many people are too afraid to raise their head above the parapet. But then that begs the question, if there's a mechanical fault, do you just simply discard the car? Or do you maybe look to change the engine? Seek out leadership that has more backbone, that doesn't look to enforce but to inspire. Seek out leadership that know the way, go the way, show the way. Seek out leadership that has more backbone than wishbone. Now I have to stress, Chief Rabbi Sachs has been an outstanding leader in his time, and if Rabbi Boteach has issues with his leadership ability, well then that's his opinion. I still need to keep my job. Sure, the position can be stifling, but perhaps something needs to be changed in the whole selection process in order to circumvent that going forward. If the process is indeed left up to a band of merry men, and this is the point I made in the Jewish Chronicle several weeks ago, to make that ultimate decision, then I say to you, indeed, all the aforementioned concerns are real, they are valid, and it begs the why and what for do we need someone who's simply there to conform to the whims of this select group. So they'll tell you, no, but we did it different this time. We compiled a list and asked people to rate on that list what they perceive in order of priority to be the necessary requirements of the chief rabbi. First, astoundingly, when I laid eyes on the list and I asked something like, why wasn't a particular quality included, the immediate reaction was, oh yes, good point. Why didn't we include that? Of course, too late. Second, they'll tell you that they want the chief rabbi to be his own man, and in the same breath are setting a job description for him with clearly defined requirements. Third, a total of approximately 200 people took part in that census. which makes up less than 1% of Anglo-Jewish community, and even if you take into account specifically the United Synagogue and its affiliates, it makes up a negligible percentage. Fourth, I'll go on the record to tell you that the future of the chief rabbinate is actually being decided tonight. Not here in this room, but there is another election going on in another part of town for the next president of the United Synagogue. And much as they may deny it to some extent, the two candidates each do have their own preconceived idea of who they already want to be the chief rabbi. And as the president of the United Synagogue becomes de facto the chair of the Chief Rabbinate Trust, otherwise translated as band leader with a view to implement their own agenda, I state this unequivocally. I dare say there were emails suddenly that were leaked and circulating in the higher echelons of the United Synagogue during the past 24 hours, which readily attest to this. Clearly some haven't learned from the news of the world that you don't put things in writing. And so I suggest to you that there should not be a selection. It's flawed. It's utterly flawed. They will always be looking for someone who complies with their worldview, which may not be or reflect the reality on the ground. There should be an election. And whilst all members voting may in fact be impractical, at the very least, the United Synagogue Council representatives from each shul who are good enough and trustworthy enough to vote in, as they will be doing tonight, the next president, they should be the ones representing their communities to vote in the next chief rabbi as well. It'll then serve a twofold purpose. Firstly, it guarantees transparency. It reflects the widest possible view of the constituents and ensures the right sort of individual. And second, it does away with Rabbi Boteach's concerns. You're no longer beholden to a select group of men who pay the piper and call the tunes. To the contrary, then you can be someone who will truly reach beyond the notes and touch the magic in the players. So let me just say this. I'm on the ground. I see the challenges facing the next generation. I see the growing disenchantment. We can go the American way, as Rabbi Boteach advocates, and end up with an ever-increasing assimilation, an ever-increasing intermarriage rate, like leaderless America. Or we can strive for new leadership, but not one that is a mere figurehead, not one that is in a political position, not one that is a mere visionary, but somebody who acts upon his dreams, someone who demonstrates by way of example. That, to my mind, is the only way forward. And frankly, we only have one chance to get it right for the foreseeable future anyway, so let's be sure that we do so. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We're going to get a slightly different perspective from our next panellist, Sally Berkowitz. He was born in Australia and has lived in Israel and America before moving to the UK in 1993. As well as being a journalist, she writes a weekly or a regular column in the JC. She's also written a very good book, which I read at the weekend, Under My Hat, about the tensions between bringing up a family, orthodox and modernity. I'd recommend it to you all. It's a really good read. But she's not going to talk about that tonight. She's going to talk about the topic under discussion. Sally.
Thanks very much. I'm often asked two types of questions when the conversation steers towards the role of women in religion. The first type can be summarised as, why don't you simply leave orthodoxy if you're so annoyed? And the second type can be summarised as, why are the Orthodox women in this country so passive when there's so much going on in America and in Israel? The person who asks the first type of question often has a very simplistic view of orthodoxy and does not appreciate that grappling with complexities is part of religious life. The person who asks the second type of question is likely to have seen educated women in positions of communal leadership and understands that Orthodox life in Britain has failed to acknowledge the alternate Orthodox realities in other parts of the world. One should note that Rabbi Schochet is Canadian, Rabbi Boteach is American, and I hail from Australia. And perhaps there's something that the outsider can bring to this conversation that is different to someone actually from the UK. And although we're here to discuss the future of the Chief Rabbinate, I would argue that tonight's discussion is really about leadership. What model of leadership do we want in our community? And where are the women in this model, in this picture? Let's be clear from the outset. Women's issues are communal issues. We cannot continue to talk about women's issues as some sort of alien force outside of the United Synagogue. Women live in families, They are daughters and they are sisters. They are married, single and divorced. They are mothers, stepmothers, foster mothers, and some are child-free. Women are full-time homemakers, some work part-time or full-time. They are involved in charitable activities or they run their own businesses. Women are more than 50% of the United Synagogue community and Anglo-Jewish as a whole. The fact that women are disengaged from the United Synagogue and that women are choosing to go elsewhere, or in fact to go nowhere, affects everyone, and everyone is responsible for this. Many of you in this audience will, I suspect, have daughters or granddaughters. With all due respect, I can assure you that most of them are more interested in Cheryl Cole's shampoo preferences and what Pippa Middleton is wearing than they are in what their Rebbitzin might have to say about a famous woman in the Torah. The X factor is their shul and Simon Cowell is their rabbi. We have a crisis in role modelling, and this stems in large part from the crisis in Jewish education in this country. Thanks to the commitment and vision of several key people in our community, we have a very high percentage of Jewish children in state-aided Jewish schools. We applaud ourselves, and yet I feel we have squandered this opportunity. Many children leave our Jewish secondary schools knowing very little Hebrew and with a distorted sense of Jewish identity that is focused on Jewish victimhood and the Holocaust. Few have acquired the skills to learn a page of Chumash with commentaries independently. Yes, there are exceptions, the inspiring teacher here and there, the head of Jewish studies desperately trying to change things, but more often than not, teenagers are disengaged from their Jewish studies. More specifically, when the curriculum is differentiated between the boys and girls, and therefore where girls are not taught Gemara and Mishnah, and girls are not introduced to essential legal texts that will give them an insight into how laws are derived and how halakha responds to changing circumstances, it is unlikely they will become the educated lay leadership that United Synagogue desperately needs. We would never dream of teaching boys and girls a different A-level syllabus. And at university, it would be preposterous to suggest that young men and women should be taught a different law, medicine, or accounting course. I'm sure that the United Synagogue has all sorts of strategic plans, including plans to increase membership and plans to engage teenagers through its tremendous Tribe program. But what about plans regarding women? Plans that would affect more than 50% of its membership. What sort of vision does the United Synagogue have for the mothers of tomorrow? I would suggest it's time that women use their money to effect some change. Philanthropy is a tool to effect change. We see it all the time. People establish charities to support the causes they believe in, and other people contribute. Many women have independent wealth, either through inheritance or as working women, yet leave it to their husbands to make the big donations, while they donate £100 here or there to charities traditionally dealing with women and children. Don't get me wrong, these charities are very important, they're excellent in what they do and deserve our support. But I'm asking a much wider question. Are women willing to take responsibility for the change they want to see? For example, are women prepared to use their financial clout to influence outcomes? Are women prepared to say, I will not join this or that organisation until 50% of the board is comprised of women? Or are women prepared to pool their money and establish new initiatives that will benefit young girls? But it's not just about money. Are women ready to demand better educational programs, not just for their daughters, but also for themselves? Are women willing to spend time learning about trends abroad? Are they willing to engage with texts? Are they willing to put themselves in challenging situations? Or are women content to relinquish all power by allowing rabbis to make all the decisions that are relevant to their lives? It puzzles me. How can it be that women who are so accomplished in their secular lives allow themselves to be infantilized in the Orthodox community? We all know women in our shuls who are leading barristers, doctors, scientists, engineers, academics, teachers, journalists. Yet, when it comes to their religious lives, they are willing to put up with second best. This may sound harsh, but I do think that unless women take responsibility for their own destiny within the United Synagogue, that very little will actually change. Of course, they should expect support and partnership from men in the community, but that women will have to be in the driving seat. I'm not sure if it's an official requirement, but I'm pretty sure the next chief rabbi will have a wife. However, I'm not interested in her. Or let me rephrase that. I will be curious about the next chief rabbi's wife, but unless the United Synagogue has provided her with a job description, a contract of employment and a salary, What she does is of little relevance to me or to the community. I am interested in who the United Synagogue will pay to lead our women. I want to know what efforts the United Synagogue will make in order to ensure that better qualified women educators will be recruited for schools under the United Synagogue umbrella. I want to know if the United Synagogue will pay for a few highly talented women to learn full-time in a Beit Midrash. I want to know if the leaders of the United Synagogue have even thought about these issues. Ideally, we wouldn't even have to have this conversation because, as I mentioned before, women's issues would be regarded as communal issues that did not need special pleading. However, given the current situation, we need a corrective for the interim period. We need to put in place a woman leader who can work in parallel with the Chief Rabbi, a woman with intellectual integrity, a thorough understanding of halachic texts, and the ability to empathise with a wide range of people. This woman will provide educational leadership, spiritual guidance, answers to halachic queries, and be a public advocate for women's concerns. In the free marketplace of ideas, where religion has to compete with many other forms of ideologies and lifestyles, I want to know what the United Synagogue and the next Chief Rabbi are going to do to address the malaise amongst women and how they are going to implement their plan. We are in the midst of a crisis that few are willing to recognise, and I am waiting for a leader who is honest enough to ask the difficult questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. A lot of material there for us to get into later on. And last, but most certainly not least, Rabbi Shmuley Boteach will be familiar to many of us from his time when he was based in Oxford here. Since then, he now lives in the States, and he describes himself on his website as an author, broadcaster, and marriage counsellor. And I'm sure you've got, many of you will have read his column in the JC, which Rabbi Schochet referred to earlier. I'm sure you've got some challenging comments for us.
Sally, Stephen, Yitzchak, ladies and gentlemen, no doubt you are all aware of the famous story of the man who receives a phone call from his doctor telling him, "Sit down because I have bad news and I have worse news." When the man sits down, the doctor says, "The test results are in and you unfortunately have 24 hours to live." And the man says, "What could possibly be worse than that?" And the doctor says, "I've been trying to call you since yesterday." I too have bad news and worse news. The bad news is you will have to indulge me for a few moments as I share the views of an outsider as to the direction of Anglo-Jewry. The worst news is that it's a Jewish few minutes. It could take all night.
No, it won't.
Okay, I stand corrected. It will only take all day. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a scandal that has gripped the United Kingdom over the past few days that has become so global in scale that it even hit the front page of the New York Times. It is not a scandal about phone tapping. It is a scandal about the tabloidization of a once glorious civilization. Britain gave the world parliamentary democracy. Britain was the first to curb the divine right of kings with Magna Carta nearly a millennium ago. Britain gave the world its great centers of learning, Oxford and Cambridge. It gifted to the world William Shakespeare and Sir Isaac Newton. And today it's become famous for naked women on pages of newspapers. The scandals, never-ending, of celebrities and politicians. It was bound to erupt with some tabloid crossing a line, because Judaism has taught for thousands of years that Lashon Hara, that always speaking ill of another, cannot lead to a positive destination. And yet, where was the Jewish voice on the increasing tabloidization of England as it happened? We are the ones who taught the world that the evil tongue is the equivalent of murdering someone, robbing them of their reputation. But our voice was silent. This country is engaged in a debate as to whether or not it should be spearheading a campaign to punish a dictator who is slaughtering his people in Libya. And this nation has redeemed itself from the oil deals it did on BP's behalf that released the Lockerbie bomber who blew up his plane the day that I flew to England for the first time to live here with my wife for 11 years, in December '88. Where is the Jewish voice on whether Britain should be spearheading that campaign? Are you aware of the fact that it is only the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, that has any commandment to protect the innocent? Leviticus chapter 19, thou shalt not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. Jesus said the opposite. In Matthew 5, he says to turn the other cheek to those who smite you. In Luke chapter 6, he says to love your enemies. Where is our voice on that? My God, where is the voice of the Jewish community? As there has been a tsunami of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiment that has washed over the shores of Great Britain. Things that we Americans cannot believe that a high court would decide for a community how to define its members. And you would have thought that the rabbis would have been in Piccadilly Circus in a line blocking every bus, getting arrested before they allowed a government, a secular government, to determine who its members are. Just imagine how the Islamic community would have reacted if a government had that chutzpah. Where is the Jewish voice as Israel is demonized on a daily basis? It is silent. It is silent because the Anglo-Jewish Rabbinate and lay leadership has always put propriety before effectiveness. It has always put appropriateness before justice. See, the problem is once you become a sir or a lord, you're knighted, you hang out with all these people who are part of the problem, and you become uncomfortable with being very critical of them. The Jews were never meant to be part of the establishment. The essence of our nation is to shape the very foundations of an establishment. Moshe brought down a tyranny in Egypt. He didn't join its nobility. We are a nation that proclaims to the world that there is one God. There's been an outbreak of atheism coming out of England. Only 40% of the British believe in God. It used to be 80%. In America, it's 92%. In Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, we have the single most eloquent, universally recognized, this to be the single most eloquent spokesman for Judaism on planet Earth in the English language. So how has this all happened? Because no person could survive that institution. It's a straitjacket. Any kind of institution. Rabbis are supposed to be unleashed. You're supposed to unleash their creativity. You're supposed to give them the tools by which to succeed, and you're supposed to let them get on with their work. They're not supposed to conform. Conformity is the enemy of innovation. There are 4 reasons why Anglo-Jewry is not prospering, and why its voice is so mute on all these important matters. Rabbi Schochet can say that we in the United States have high levels of assimilation, and it's true. He can say that we have high levels of intermarriage, and it's true. But if you think that the American Jewish community wouldn't have shaken the very pillars of the American Republic if some government advertising watchdog said that the Kotel can't appear in a TV ad, or if you think that our students would not have shaken the foundations of their universities if their academics barred Israelis from participating in academic conferences. My God, what has happened here? How has it happened? Who has allowed it to happen? You mean we have no voice? It is time to not just loosen Anglo-Jewry's corset, which was a clever title given by the Jewish Chronicle to the piece that I offered this past week. It's time to decentralize all of the institutions that have made it so impossible for rabbis to innovate. I lived here for 11 years. I got used to being heckled on a regular basis. I got used to being attacked on a weekly basis. I'm no martyr, I'm no victim. I have my flaws. I enjoyed the attention that I got in the Jewish Chronicle. I enjoyed some of the recognition that I achieved. But the attacks became so severe because I suggested certain things that, with all due respect, ladies and gentlemen, I think would be commonplace anywhere but the United Kingdom. An Orthodox rabbi can't sit on a panel with a Reform rabbi to talk about staunching the tide of anti-Semitism. We Orthodox rabbis can't go to a cemetery. Forget going to a Reform shul, we can debate that. We can't go to a cemetery to pay respects to a Jew who survived the Holocaust. I participated in those things, and I regret them today. I regret them today. In the United States, rabbis rise and fall by effectiveness alone. Of course there's halacha. I'm an Orthodox Jew, passionately so. But there is no halacha that says you can't sit with a Reform rabbi on a panel. There is no halacha that says that what Sally, the impassioned case that she made, and I thank you because I'm raising 6 daughters, thank God, who I want to be Orthodox, educated women. It's absurd that women don't learn halacha, Gemara, Mishnah. In Lubavitch, we teach them Hasidus from the age of 13 and 14, the esoteric secrets of the Torah. I have a daughter who's in a seminary in Yerushalayim, who over the past few days we were traveling and I wanted to see the battlefields of France, D-Day, the Normandy beaches. She made me sit down with her and study the Rebbe's Mimer for the day of the anniversary of his death, Gimel Thomas, my 19-year-old. I agree with you 1,000%. Women have been disenfranchised. There is no halacha that says they should be. We need educated women who know the Torah, who raise a generation of children who know the Torah. The Anglo-Jewish chief rabbinate must be decentralized. If you want to have some spokesman, so be it. If you feel you need an ambassador or a diplomat, so be it. But the rigid control of the rabbinate must be relaxed if you are to have real innovation. It's the same difference between extreme socialism and capitalism. Capitalism has its problems. But you got to get people to be a little bit creative. You can't make their decisions for them. That's what Jewish law is for, therefore. In America, we have a constitution, there are laws, but after that. But so much of the communal, I'm finished with this, so many of the communal structures and norms that are imposed upon the rabbinate by far exceed the dictates of halacha and Jewish law. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Before I open it up to the audience, there's just something I'd like to get to grips with amongst the panel. Certainly from what you were saying, Rabbi Boteach, and inherent in all these debates about the future direction of the chief rabbinate is this tension. Certainly it's a tension that I think Lord Sachs has been criticised for, between whether the chief rabbinate is indeed, as he put it, an ambassador to the rest of the world, or whether he should be a leader much more inwardly focused in terms of the Jewish community. And I just wondered if you could briefly share your thoughts on where, because you can't do both. You have to do one or the other, and it seems that Lord Sachs has certainly been, you know, he's like a lot of these such posts, he seems to be revered outside the community and criticised inside the community. I wonder where you think the next chief rabbi should be.
First, for a bit of a news flash, election results have come in. And Steve Pack came in with 124 votes. Peter Zinkin came in with 42 votes. I can now tell you who will not be the next chief rabbi, and who will most likely be the next chief rabbi, but I won't, not just yet.
Oh, you will.
But I'm actually relieved with this result, because I think the precise reason why one of them lost is because people knew who he was also backing for the next chief rabbi, and that in itself goes back to my earlier point. And this in itself actually comes to the core of your real question, and that is, there are different perspectives. Some might argue that indeed a chief rabbi should be an ambassador to the outside world, and over time, unfortunately, Lord Sachs did get a reputation of being a chief rabbi more popular with the secular outside world than necessarily with the Jewish community. And I think it's fair to say that the emphasis, to my mind certainly, for the next chief rabbi or chief rabbinate has to be much more inward. It's great to be a spokesperson, it's great to be in the Credo in Times, it's great to be on the radio and on television or whatever else besides, but there's got to be a lot more inspiration channeled inwards, to be innovative, to be creative. And I think that's where Rabbi Boteach's argument actually falls down, because it's not about having to be out there giving an opinion about news of the world, phone hacking, regardless of what Jewish law says. there's plenty out there, and not everybody's going to necessarily care to even pay attention to what you have to say anyway. It's about being inward, it's about reaching out to Anglo-Jewry and only to Anglo-Jewry, and about encouraging and inspiring and innovating and creating ideas that can take Anglo-Jewry forward. There were some great ideas, flash in the pans. There was Jewish continuity that was here today, gone tomorrow. There were several other grand ideas that just came and went. There was this annual sort of alternative to Limud, etc., etc. I think the very fact that the chief rabbi never went to Limud, which I'm proud to say I did last December, in itself just speaks volumes about that lack of leadership that has to be channeled much more inwardly. So for the future, it has to be a communal or a rabbi's rabbi.
I don't have a strong view on that. My point is around women's participation in leadership, and whichever person women need to be recognised both within, and the way women are portrayed outside to the community is also important. I don't have a strong view.
And given that there is going to be a chief rabbi, whatever you think, whether there should or not, what you talked about earlier, with the need to be an ambassador and to talk outside, how do you think that should fall?
Well, since I don't believe that a rabbi should be a tease, and I feel that Yitzchak is teasing us, I am here to admit, okay, I was just elected the new chief rabbi. Thank you all very much. God bless you. Yitzchak, this is going to be my main place where I work. No. Whoever the chief rabbi is going to be, I believe that the American model is what really works. Israel has a chief rabbi. It hasn't worked. Secular Israelis are the most religious people you will meet, because the imposition of religion on them has not worked. I personally prefer the Chabad approach. You inspire people to do a mitzvah, and one leads to the other. You don't tell them that this is the law and it's going to be forced on you. Israel is so deeply divided. Go to Tel Aviv. Try to find a kosher restaurant in Tel Aviv. You'll walk many blocks. You'll have to go to a hotel to find a kosher restaurant. People have become anti-religious. Okay, but to address this particular point, a chief rabbi, to the extent that one should exist, is not a spokesman or an ambassador. Moshe Rabbeinu, the first great leader, stuttered. He couldn't even give a public speech. His spokesman was his brother. He didn't even write anything original. The 5 books of Moses were dictated to him by God. He had no original writings. What made him a leader was his moral courage, his preparedness to take a definite stand, even if he was hated for it. He watched an Egyptian beating a Jew, and although he was part of the establishment, he was an Egyptian prince, he had all those fancy titles. He said, this is my opportunity. Will I stand with my people and lose my place in society? Or will I not? And he chose to be with the Jews. That act of moral courage. Do you think that Martin Luther King is remembered today as arguably America's greatest figure of the 20th century? Up there with the Founding Fathers is a day named after him, Martin Luther King Day. Because he gave great speeches, because he was a phenomenal orator, and he was America's greatest speaker of the 20th century. That's not what he's remembered for. He's remembered for his marches. He marched against injustice. He was prepared to be fired on by water cannons and by attack dogs. Until someone gets up in the House of Lords or in Parliament and says, this anti-Israel bias has got to stop now. And if you won't invite me to your cocktail parties, so be it. And if you don't want me on your TV shows, God bless you anyway. But I will speak my mind. Because Britain was never this way. When I lived here for 11 years, people always ask me, do you think the British are anti-Semitic? I said, of course not. But the stuff that has happened recently, do you understand how we watched this debate over the British government determining who is a Jew? And you're going to say, well, it's British government funding for our schools. It's their money. They can tell us how to spend it. Really? It's your money. It's your tax dollars. It was never their money. Governments don't have money. And it was still allowed. I find that astonishing. A chief rabbi takes on positions like that, even if he is hated and unpopular for it.
Okay. I'm going to open it up to questions and comments from the audience. Can we try and keep it sort of relatively thematic? So perhaps if people could say first of all who they are. Can we maybe carry on with this idea of whether the next chief rabbi, we'll talk about the issue of whether there should be or shouldn't be in a minute, but assuming that there will be, which there will be, a new chief rabbi, let's talk about this issue of whether he should be inward-looking or carry on in the spirit, as it were, of Lord Sachs. Perhaps we could have some question on that at the back, sir.
Jason Greenspan. Just a quick one. I think there's two points here. One of which is the role which Lord Sachs has created and we now understand is that of the spokesman stroke ambassador for the Jewish people across, to the wider society. But I suppose the other question here is, what is now the role of the Dayanim within this whole new mantra, or within the whole sort of new chief rabbi's remit?
It's a very fair question. I think that the role of the Beth Din itself has altered considerably since there have been changes within the actual Beth Din itself. The chief rabbi, the current chief rabbi, always insisted in his contract that he should be not just chief rabbi, but also of Beis Din, which I'll explain simply as when you have a Beth Din, you have one of the Beth Din that is the Rosh Beth Din, which by definition means the head of the Beth Din, the leading judge, if you like. And the chief rabbi insisted that he should be the of Beis Din, as in the father figure of the overall Beis Din, which in effect means that he has the ultimate veto. He's exercised that veto on a couple of occasions. This may come as a surprise to you, or maybe even a bigger surprise to Sally, but the chief rabbi did always insist, certainly to me, that it was he who was always blocking women from becoming chairman of shuls, not his actual Beth Din. But be that as it may, I think it is important that in the future structure, the chief rabbinate and the Beth Din, other than on matters of halachic concern, immediate halachic concern, have to be divested one from the other. If the chief rabbi, again, his job is to inspire the community. You have 3 dayanim, each of them is a rabbi in their own shul. None of those shuls are actually United Synagogue shuls. As much as they might be engaged in halachic decisions and tragically divorces and organizing marriages and all the rest of that, and conversions and whatnot, which is a separate discussion in itself, that's their remit, and that's as far as it should go. They shouldn't be bullying, exercising influence, and trying to dictate to rabbis about the direction and which way forward. I can tell you that one Dayan texted me today when he got, some email or whatever it was with regard to tonight's event. I was kind of tempted to ask him why he has email, or what is he doing with an iPhone or something like that. It's not appropriate. He should have a kosher phone. But what he did text me back was something like narishkeit, which means nonsense. Why aren't you spending your time being marbitz Torah, spreading Torah, or teaching Torah instead? And I just cynically wrote back to him saying, I tend to do that sometimes as well, but only sometimes. Frankly, that sort of bullying tactic, that sort of aggression, that sort of influence that the Beis Din used to tend to exert a lot, particularly on younger, more influential rabbis, it has no place in the system. And on that point, Rabbi Boteach is right. Rabbis should be allowed to express themselves within the realm of halacha as they indeed so wish.
On the point of Dayanim, in terms of women's involvement with Dayanim, I think they feel even more disenfranchised and find it even more difficult to access the Dayanim. And I think that's also about not having a good understanding of the text and the knowledge that the Dayanim have to their, that's what they've done, that's their professional life. And it's always used against the women being unable to answer the Dayanim, and yet we need women who are able to work with the Dayanim to help women going through divorce, conversion. I believe I don't know if it still exists. There was at one point when you got divorced, you could have a woman going in with you. To be honest, I'm not sure if that's still the case. But we need a lot more of that cooperation between women and Dayanim. In a way, this role, all these roles are sort of job shares. The chief rabbi role, it's a very difficult task.
I really don't have a comment on this, since I have not lived here for 11 years now, and I have not followed the interaction between the chief rabbi and Beis Din.
Okay. There was a hand right at the back. Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of linked to both the Beth Din question and also the Limud which you raised. And that is, do you think...
Just give your name.
Sorry, Jonathan Wolfson. Do you think the next chief rabbi should be encouraged, in fact possibly ordered, to attend Limud, even if that is against the wishes of the Dayanim, given that there are many hundreds of United Synagogue members who attend each year?
I have to say, just to butt in there, in my, in terms of the emails I get and the meetings, I do meetings in shuls, United shuls mainly, about once a week, and I would say there's probably more anger from people that the chief rabbi doesn't go to the Limud than any other single issue I've come across. It really is quite potent.
I actually, as you know, put my head above the parapet in going to Liva this year, and I needed to see all for myself. And I didn't get a peep out of the Besdin, interestingly enough. And maybe it's because, and that's partly what concerned them, that hey, this is the so-called right-wing Orthodox rabbi, and he's going to Limud. So that kind of keeps him in a very safe place. They can't suddenly suggest, oh, he's one of the lefties. And I was astounded, quite wonderfully, to discover the overwhelming majority of those who attend, in actual fact, and this is not the real issue, but from the United Synagogue perspective, over 80% or near enough to that attend are actually United Synagogue members. A tremendous amount of them are young and the next generation, and it beggars belief that we, as United Synagogue Rabbinate, don't actually attend to reach out to, in effect, what is our own constituency. I would add to that, well, you asked the question, should the chief rabbi be encouraged, maybe indeed even forced? Well, once you start doing that, you come back to my earlier point. He's got to be his own man. But that's why when you do the election, in due course, it should be done in a way where you're going to have the right sort of candidate that would be understanding and willing to reach out in that sort of way in the first instance, regardless of what a Beth might have to say.
I've never understood what the problem was going to be. You went for a day, is that right?
I did.
Right.
Because my wife wanted me to go on holiday for the rest of it.
See, he listened to his wife. My issue with this discussion as to whether Orthodox rabbis should attend Limud, or which revolves around the question as to whether they should participate in something where the non-Orthodox are teaching, or indeed share the same platform, or anything like that, is twofold. Number one, are we really fooling ourselves to believe that orthodoxy, that Reform is sitting around waiting to be legitimized by the Orthodox? Reform Judaism in the United States represents about 35% of American Jewry, millions of people. I don't know what the exact percentage here is in the UK, but I would assume it's something similar. Do you think that they're sitting around waiting and thinking, you know, if the Orthodox don't finally say that we're kosher, we're going to just disappear? So the first point is, it's nonsense to believe that you're legitimizing something that 1 out of 3 Jews belongs to. Indeed, if you share panels and you discuss things, this is my second point, you can demonstrate that orthodoxy is fearless in winning arguments in the marketplace of ideas. That we could sit with our Reform colleagues and show them respect, but through the conversations, demonstrate that traditional halachic Judaism is unafraid, and it can win arguments in the marketplace of ideas. This isn't about legitimacy. This is about demonstrating that orthodoxy is alive and well, fearless. Whenever you're afraid of something, those who see you afraid believe it's because you have nothing to say. They say you're fearful because you have an impoverished argument. I don't believe that about orthodoxy. Indeed, when I lived here, much as it may have been wishful thinking, I tried to broker a deal with, at the time, Rabbi Dr. Sidney Brickdale, where the only real issue with Reform, the main issue, is issues of Jewish identity. Conversion, marriage, divorce. Those issues have to be addressed. This is a ticking time bomb. Because right now, members of the United Synagogue who drive to shul on Shabbos, but who still believe that they are Orthodox affiliated, and they are, their children are not going to marry. Today, they will still marry the children of members of a Reform synagogue. You give it a generation or two, and they won't. They're going to say, there's been too much confusion over the conversion issues, and a ban will go out to marry anyone. They're going to say, we just don't know who's Jewish anymore. It'll be like the problem Israel had with the Russians, which tore the country apart for years, until they just instituted almost a mass conversion for all the Russians. We're headed in that direction, and no one wants to address it. Do you think if you take your head and you shove it in the ground and pretend not to see that these problems are going to go away? They have to be engaged. We are one people. We are one nation.
Just wanted to comment on...
You speak in the microphone.
Sure, I'm sorry, thank you. Limud and other initiatives where people from across the community get together, I think women have demonstrated that they do that very well. That there was, I think it's sort of now defunct or very small, but the Jewish Women's Network, which I belonged to many years ago, brought women together from a range of perspectives to educate, you know, educational programs, social programs, a way of getting to know each other. And I'm sure there are men also across the divide, people on the ground. We know each other, we have friends from different shuls and different communities. And I think it's a shame that this issue has been hijacked by the leadership, when in fact, on the ground, people know each other, respect each other, and are married to each other, and a family with each other. And this issue is, I agree that it's going to lead to a lot of problems, but somehow the women have been able to engineer much better cooperation across the spectrum.
Thanks. There's a woman at the front. At the front. There. Madam. With the purple trousers.
Hello Sally, this is Avril Mailer from the now defunct Jewish Women's Network. And we're still analysing several years down the line as to why what was an amazing initiative for over 10 years eventually became polarised and the orthodox end of the spectrum tailed away. I did hear stories later on, after its demise, from women who said that they had been pressured by their community, where people had, especially in Manchester, interestingly, had been threatened that people would boycott their husbands' businesses if they continued. I don't know how widespread that was, or I can't confirm those stories, but it is something that should be looked into as to why this cross-spectrum initiative had a shelf life and didn't survive, because I still mourn that demise to this day.
Can I follow that with a specific question to both of you? All of you, in fact. It's just I think I know what your answer will be on this one. Do you think the next Chief Rabbi should instigate changes to enable women to become officers, trustees of United Synagogue shuls?
In a simple word, if there's acceptability within the realm of halacha, then unquestionably so.
Me and Rabbi Schochet are Chabad rabbis. I wish some of you saw the pictures of the Lubavitcher Rebbe surrounded by perhaps 10,000 women. On the many occasions he would address women alone without a single man in the room. They would bring him large bouquets of flowers. When Chabad emissaries started going around the world, they were called Schochet, and there was no real title for their wife. It's 20, 30 years later. They're all called Shluchos today. They have the same title. They have the conventions. I think it's absurd to deny women titles that demonstrate their commitment. Where did this stuff come from? I don't even understand. Do you know what big issues we have to address? Do you know that the state of Israel is embattled and Iran is building a nuclear bomb? Do you know that the Jewish community is becoming known around the world for Wall Street and money and grotesque materialism, $1 million bar mitzvahs and weddings? Do you know that we have a 50% assimilation rate, intermarriage rate? And this is the stuff we're talking about? We are fiddling while Rome is burning. Victoria Beckham had a baby today, and I would assume that most Anglo-Jews know far more about that than almost anything happening in their own community. And we're talking about whether women should have titles. Women, of course, should participate. Let me just say something else. You go to any campus, synagogue, run by Chabad or the Orthodox synagogues that across the United States, you will see the female students every week giving Divrei Torah. You will see them being presidents of the organizations. It's not even questioned on a campus. This has nothing to do with Jewish law. This has to do with the way things have always been done. Well, when your community is shrinking to the point of near non-existence, you need to think a little bit differently and get rid of that straitjacket.
You knew the answer.
Madam,
Hi, my name is Lindsay Simmons. I'd just like to come back to what Rabbi Schochet said about if there's halachic acceptability. I mean, I would like a one-word answer, actually. And the if there's halachic acceptability is an answer that's often given in order to excuse or ignore or maintain, in this case, the status quo. And I think that you're a rabbi, you create the halachic reality. That is the responsibility given to you because of the title that you have, and you have to take that responsibility and utilize it, and therefore you have to give a one-word answer.
You know, that age-old euphemism where there is a rabbinic will, there's a halachic way, is actually an insult to rabbis, to Torah, and to God himself, because God is the ultimate author of Torah, of halacha. And then there are certain, what you might call gray areas, and it is within the realm of those gray areas that things have to be thoroughly researched to determine what is actually in conformity with halacha and what is not. Contrary to what Rabbi Boteach says, I doubt you will find a shlucha anywhere in the world who will get up to give the actual sermon in the middle of a service in any Chabad house across the Jewish world. That isn't to say that she can't give a Dvar Torah somewhere else in another kind of format. Again, there is what is acceptability and there is what is not considered acceptability. There is where we maintain our moral high ground within orthodoxy, and there is where we might choose to go down a slippery slope, and then it becomes an issue of perception, to use the words of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, blurring lines between what is orthodox and what is actually reform. So we have to be very clear in where we define those lines. That isn't to say that we can't actually be more innovative, and yes, certainly giving women a much greater voice than they might otherwise be handed at the moment.
Okay, if you were chief rabbi, would it be halakhically acceptable to you? Forget anyone else, forget the rest of it. Would you think it would be a good thing to do?
The answer to that is yes, I think it would be a good thing to do. I never researched it in any great depth in terms of halacha. It does become a very real practical halacha. It is discussed in Maimonides and other codifiers. But if I can find some categorical loophole, or not even loophole, sorry, that's wrong. If I can find some categorical acceptability for it, then I would certainly sanction it, yes.
Okay, that's clear.
Hi, good evening, it's Jerome Reback. Rabbi Schochet earlier spoke about the concept of a chief rabbinate as opposed to a chief rabbi, and I'll be interested to understand more about what he has in mind, what the structure of that is and how it would operate, and what is he suggesting?
Rabbi Shmuley actually made a very valid point before when he talked about the whole hierarchical system and the way that we are stifled in being able to properly express ourselves. Though I will say in my own defense, when it did come to that big issue that he's talking about with JFS, I was the lone voice in the wilderness that did dare to cry out. And I can dare say publicly that I then got summoned in and wrapped on the wrist and more in actual fact. And therein lies the actual flaw in the whole system. I don't think...
Can you say by whom?
I'll leave it to your own imagination.
I don't live here anymore. I really don't know.
Well, let's just say it wasn't the Beth Din, because they're too scared to start up with me. So you just got to go a little higher than that.
The Prime Minister called you in.
I'm more interested not in who it was, but what the more punishment was. And we're not going to get anywhere with you, are we?
You already have a chance.
The chief rabbinate that I'm talking about, you know, I spoke to a couple of colleagues who are intelligent men, who are unhesitant to actually express themselves in their own way, PhDs, etc. And I spoke to two of them actually this afternoon, and there was a great sense of outrage in the fact that no one ever really started the whole new process of searching for a chief rabbi on the right footing. I mean, Simon Hochhauser came along all patronizing to us and said, I'm going to do what any previous president of the United Synagogue didn't do, and I'm going to make sure to consult with the rabbis in this instance. Sure, so he handed us the same sheet that he gave all the other different working groups to tick our own boxes of what we determine is an appropriate quality or whatnot. That was the full extent of it. And rabbis, who ultimately are the ones that are the ambassadors on the ground, are pretty much incensed, bar the one or two that are actually desperately dying for the job. But the rest of them are pretty much incensed about the fact that there was no consultation process to really determine, A, if we do need a new chief rabbi, and B, even if that is the case, what kind of shape should that actually take? You know, the question was raised before whether a chief rabbi should be a spokesperson to the outside world, whether he should be more inward. Frankly, I don't think any one person can encompass all of those roles, and we've seen that, in effect, within Chief Rabbi Sachs as well. It's not a fault of his. It's just the restriction of the nature of the individual. So you can be one thing or the other. If you really want to make it work appropriately, I think perhaps you need more than one person. You have a chief rabbinate office. You can have 2 or 3 people, maybe, ideally. Not a Beth Din, but 3 people, each with their own specifically defined roles in what they would actually do in terms of taking Anglo-Jewry further into the 21st century.
And would you suggest one of those would be a woman then?
Not any more than I would suggest a woman should be a rabbi of any one particular community. But there's no reason why a woman cannot be, as you advocated earlier, someone who is always consulted on issues or takes a lead in regard to specific issues appertaining to women.
Can I just offer this idea that migrating from chief rabbi to a chief rabbinate, some sort of triumvirate, smacks me of the same problem. And please forgive me, because I confess that I'm now speaking from the perspective of an American who looks at the United Kingdom through an American lens. I'm always puzzled why the British are so obsessed with figureheads and with titles and with nobility. When I debated Richard Dawkins, the world's most famous atheist, produced right here in the United Kingdom in Oxford, in Toronto recently, he got up and he said, I don't care if religion works, I don't care if it leads to stronger families and morality. If it's a lie, it's a lie. I agree with that argument. Maimonides says the same thing. Beginning of the Guide to the Perplexed, he says, you must embrace the truth regardless of its source. If it comes from an atheist, you got to embrace the truth. I believe it's not the truth, though, that there is no God, of course. But I got up and I said, here's what I don't get. Richard Dawkins says that he goes against religion because it's a lie, because there is no God, even if it helps society. Then why hasn't he been speaking out against the royal family? All these years he's been a British subject. For goodness sake, the one manifest untruth which stares us in the face every single day is that nobody's born with blue blood. No one is born a prince. We're all equal. It's the first chapter of Genesis. And yet he never felt the need, because he would say, that form of government has worked for 1,000 years, so let's keep it, even though it's a lie. The British seem obsessed with figureheads, so chief rabbi doesn't work? Let's still not let go of all these titles. Let's call a spade a spade. The central governments of Europe have led to mass bankruptcies, which are pulling down all the other European governments. In the United States, we face a lot of the same problems with the trade unions, and all their contracts are now being renegotiated. The West is bankrupt. It has no money left because these central structures did not work. What does work is unleashing the creative capacity of individual citizens. Britain has to be more of a meritocracy and less of an aristocracy. The same thing is true of the Jewish community. Do you really need an Archbishop of Canterbury? He has 2% of his followers who go to church every Sunday. Church of England is a rotting corpse. It's tragic to see how bad it's become. Does anyone here remember a thing at the royal wedding of the homily that was said? Even a word. You remember a word of it? Compare that to the evangelical Christians who are growing in their millions in the United States. There's no Pope. There's no Archbishop of Canterbury. There's individual pastors who are building mega churches. That's the way American Jewry is as well. And that's why I would say that American Jewry, for all its flaws, and it has many, is still flourishing. Do you know that AIPAC had 10,000 people just a few months ago to pressure our government for Israel? Where's the British AIPAC or BIPAC or whatever? You're going to say we don't have the same numbers. You know, Rabbi Dean Steinsaltz gave an incredible speech that I heard in central London when I was still living here. He said, how many people lived in Athens at the height of its glory? Does anyone know? I didn't know until he said it. 20,000. Their influence is felt till today. It's not about numbers. It's about the will to bring pressure. And the more you create these straitjackets, the less you can do it.
I think you'll have heard the inherent contradiction in what Rabbi Boteach said all this evening, because he kept on quoting Moshe. Yes, there were heads of each individual tribe. They were the rabbis. But they had a chief rabbi known as Moshe. He talks about Lubavitch, Shluchim, emissaries, representatives, each dynamic and empowered in their own right around the world. But they had a central figure, the Rebbe, who continued to inspire them. And that's why the next chief rabbi is essential, to be a rabbi's rabbi, to motivate the rabbis of the individual communities to be able to carry on and be inspired in doing their work.
May I just say, I think it's fair to say that Chabad has not had a chief rabbi now for 16 years, because what the Rebbe's accomplishment, if I may say, was to create leaders and not followers. And Chabad has grown more, as Chabad always points out, more rapidly since the Rebbe passed away 17 years ago, because inspiration is not necessarily, and the Rebbe never had any official title. He was never given any title. He was never crowned with any title. He was called just the Rebbe. And he came because his virtue put him in that place. It was universally recognized that he was a towering figure. There weren't people who stood around, and there wasn't an election either. It was just there. And because they can't now find someone who could even compare with him, as you and I might agree, Chabad has done it on its own and has greatly succeeded. If anything, the Chabad model shows that what I'm saying, I think, is accurate.
Oh, come on.
Because we're sort of drawing to the end, I'll take a couple of questions at a time. There were two people at the back. Two of you right at the back there, and I'll come to you next.
Hi, Rabbi Schochet. My name's Adina. I work with Jewish students both in primary school and older, but one of the things that seems to be coming out tonight is that we don't have such a strong identity in the United Synagogue. People are scared of doing things for women because, oh my gosh, maybe Reform got there first. Like, Reform don't care about that. But they're teaching ideology, and they come to college and they come to university, and they have a strong identity. And one of the things I'd like to know, whether we have a chief rabbi or a chief rabbinate or whatever, I'm a little unclear that I see our United Synagogue rabbis who share my go-to rabbis who I look up to, but they don't use their own eruv, and they don't eat in their own restaurants, and they don't eat in our houses, and they don't send their kids to United Synagogue schools. And I just wonder whether part of the reason that United Synagogue Jewry doesn't quite have such an identity is because our rabbis aren't really batting for that identity. They don't know what that identity is. They're not having that conversation. And that could be part of the apathy, because we feel like they're the frum ones. They're a lot of the time going off with the Haredim and the more right-wing parts of the community. And we're left behind, like being not quite good enough. They can tell us about how to keep our homes kosher, but they can't eat there. They can tell us how to use the eruv, but they can't use it. And it's just a little bit disturbing, because if it's good enough for your congregants, then it should be good enough for you.
Okay, and right next to you. So, yeah, back left there.
This is to Rabbi Boteach, just on one small detail he mentioned, or me personally. You mentioned Chassidus before. Chassidus talks a lot about the concept of a leader and the idea of a tzaddik, and talks about the idea of having a leader in the physical sense, and puts a lot of emphasis on a leader is not the physical concept, it's more of a spiritual. And just when you said that, yes, the Rebbe passed away 17 years ago, the Rebbe passed away 17 years ago, but as Chassidus explains that the concept of a leader is not the physicalness of him, and Chabad definitely has a leader, continues to have a leader. The stories are numerous. Again, it's not in the physical sense, as the Rebbe had passed away many years ago, but we definitely have a spiritual leader. You say he didn't have a title. I'm sorry, but the Rebbe used a title called Nasi, which is we have already in the Torah, which means a leader, which is a title the Rebbe spoke about many, many times, and I'm sorry, I disagree about what you said, that we don't have a leader.
You start with me, you start with my family.
Let me just say that very briefly, because this is off subject, the Rebbe never used the title Nasi about himself. He was a man of supreme humility. He only ever called his father-in-law that. It remains one of the astonishing details of the more than 4 decades of his leadership that he never accepted any title. And he always referred to loved in the Orthodox, in the world Orthodox community, and the builder of Efrat, tells a famous story, as you probably know, Rabbi Schochet, that when he was thinking of creating women's minyanim at Lincoln Square Synagogue, he tells a story, he's told it many times at Chabad dinners. I think you can even find it online. He went to the Rebbe and he asked the Rebbe, this is a very controversial idea to create women's minyanim, should I do it or not? And you know the famous story. The Rebbe said to him, Nish nor mekt ir dostan, you can finish it, Rabbi Schochet. Must ir dostan. Not only should you do it, you must do it.
Okay. Let's deal with the...
Chuck, can I just come back to it earlier? Okay, we'll leave this one alone. This is something that Rabbi Boteach and I have to get over a bottle of whiskey and spend many hours through tonight.
As long as it's single malt, please.
But I want to come back. You actually, sorry, the lady at the back, you actually raised a very, very fascinating point. You are so right, and therein lies the enigma of the United Synagogue, where you have a situation of membership that is mostly made up of, I hate to use labels, but let's just say less observant, more observant. And you have the rabbis, many of whom actually might be perceived as more right-wing or more ultra-orthodox, etc. I don't actually think there's a contradiction in that whatsoever. In fact, I think it's very necessary that in order to get the balance right, in order for the United Synagogue, which again is made up as its vast majority of a membership that may be less observant, but to retain its standing within Orthodoxy, you need rabbis who are able to continue to steer it in the right, and I use that word in both contexts, sort of direction. But for that, yes, you are right, you do need rabbis who are very much in touch with their actual membership. When I came to this community 18 years ago, this August, I sat down at a table when I was going through the selection process, and I said that I know part of the concern that many of you have is the fact that I am a Chabad rabbi. I then spent 2 minutes defining what I perceived as the problem within the United Synagogue, in line pretty much of what you said before. I spent another 2 minutes explaining what Chabad actually represents, and then I spent the last 2 minutes in explaining why one actually is probably most ideal for the other. And I got my unanimous vote in favor. And therein lies the point. You do need to have people who, whilst on the one hand maintaining their own standards, at the same time are able to reach out to their constituents and are in touch with their constituents to a point where their own constituents are able to relate to them as well. The fact that one might have their own imposed stringency of kashrus, so they may not want to eat, I don't know, within a Bet Din restaurant, reasons be known only to them. That's their business. That doesn't mean anything, as long as they're not suggesting or implying to other people that it's not good enough to eat it. If a rabbi wants to, in line with what is quoted in Code of Jewish Law, not carrying the Eruv, not because the Eruv isn't kosher, but purely because of an extra stringency upon himself, and yes, that's brought in Jewish law, again, nothing to do with the Eruv per se, but simply because you might end up in a place where there's no Eruv, and you don't want to make that sort of mistake. If a rabbi wants to have these greater stringencies that he takes upon himself, he has to be a beacon of light. He has to be someone who others can look up to. But by the same token, even as they're looking up to him with his higher standards, he should never be looking down upon them.
Lady with the brown.
Sharon
Just say the microphone.
Oh, sorry. Sharon Eskenazi. I just wanted to point out two things. There are currently 2 women trustees on the United Synagogue board, and there are 2 vacant positions for 2 women to join the board. This has only just happened in the last 6 months, but the 2 co-chair of the United Synagogue Women's Association are now both trustees, so they are moving forward.
Next to you with the blue too.
My name is Joseph Hyman. The United Synagogue prides itself on being a universal organisation. When it comes to the youth who the role model of the Chief Rabbi will inspire, how will a decentralised system in the United Synagogue promote a role model that will fight the Cheryl Coles and Victoria Beckhams of the UK, Rabbi Boteach?
Like any meritocratic system, men and women, male and female spokespeople for the Jewish community will arise, who are chosen by the media and others based on their effectiveness and their ability to communicate a message. You know, Jonathan Sachs would have emerged as a spokesman of the Jewish community even had he not been chosen as chief rabbi, because he is that eloquent. If anything, all the chief rabbinate did to him was ensure that he was straitjacketed from taking very controversial positions, either in the community because he would alienate an ever-decreasing slice of the community, or because it would upset the British establishment, of which he is now a part.
Two more questions, and then something up. Sir?
I'd like to make 3 points.
No, 1 point, please.
Michael Gross, we had a chief rabbi in the persona of Rav Jacobowitz, who not only succeeded in being a Rav, but succeeded not just representing the Jewish people, but becoming the moral conscience of the nation. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe said to me and many other people that Central Orthodoxy in Britain was all important. So anybody who claims to be a Lubavitch rabbi would want to respect that, even those who've been rejected by Lubavitch. And he made it clear that it's the persona of that individual who makes the difference. I'm not here to defend or attack Jonathan Sachs, but his objective from the beginning was not the same as Rav Jacobowitz, and the results were not the same as Rav Jacobowitz. If we get someone who can restore the rabbinic credentials of the office, then we'll be a lot better off.
Thank you. One more question. No, just behind you. Second row, there.
Caroline Monk. I would say that we certainly do need a leader in this country, but we need a Beth Din that is made up of all the different parts of Judaism in this country, not just the Orthodox, because who does our chief rabbi actually represent? Is it just United Synagogue members, or there's Reform, there's Liberal, there's all Jewry in this country? We need representatives there elected from the different communities.
Before I come to the panel, there are so many issues that we haven't even touched on. That is one of them. Really important issue. Who actually is the chief rabbi representing? We know that it is technically, but in practical terms. Just before I ask the panel to come back with their last answers, and they can sum up as well, I'm just interested. I mean, Rabbi Schochet, I think, came out for the first time tonight saying that there should be an election for the leader. I don't think you said that before. Can I just ask, just as a matter of interest, is there anyone in this room who doesn't think that the chief rabbi should be elected by United Synagogue members? About 4 or 5 people. It's really overwhelming. It's quite interesting that everyone you talk to thinks that the next chief rabbi should be elected.
And that is what is most disturbing, that you have a small group of men. And actually, Stephen, I'm going to throw the challenge to you, because if the Daily Mail can launch its own crusades to get things going, then maybe the Jewish Chronicle ought to launch a crusade for the benefit of Anglo-Jewish.
It's not a challenge that, how can I put it, it's a challenge that will be answered fully, because that's actually something we're planning over the course of the summer. Absolutely. I think the mood in the amongst members of United Synagogue Shores is so overwhelming. I think it's something.
Can I just say one?
Anyway, this isn't about me lecturing.
Can I just say one thing?
Briefly.
Former cousin of this shul. I like to say, Israel had a very, very successful chief rabbi, Rabbi Cook, and he was very loved even amongst non-Frummers with Frummers. I disagree with Rabbi Boteach to say that even Israel didn't. He was one of the most popular person, Rabbi Cook of Israel, the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi.
As was Rabbi Lau more recently as well.
Exactly, I was Rabbi Lau as well.
Absolutely.
Wait.
Rabbi Cook did not want women to have the vote. If I can point that out.
Okay, let's come to something's up.
Just to sum up, I was actually very ambivalent about doing tonight. I was approached about it's going to be a debate, should there be a chief rabbi, not a chief rabbi, and to be honest, that's not my issue. My issue was around women's leadership and the paucity of it, and the paucity of opportunities. But I decided to come along, partly because I'm always complaining that women don't have a voice and are not given. You often see platforms where it's mainly men speaking, or only men, and the boards of all our major organisations are primarily men. And I thought if I'm offered this opportunity, it would be almost irresponsible of me not to accept it. So I'm glad I accepted it. However, it has reinforced for me that this is a very male conversation. And I understand that the issue is around the chief rabbi at the moment, but it's a very interesting dynamic what's gone on this evening, and it's reinforced the notion that men are having this conversation without women. And until women are really part of the conversation, and in some ways may have to force themselves to be part of the conversation, very little will change. But that's the challenge I throw out to you.
Sally, isn't the reason that this isn't about imposing an idea from above to below? That's what this male conversation has emphasized. And perhaps the one great area of agreement between me and Yitzchak, if you believe, as do I, that women should study Torah fully and completely, if you believe that women should assume positions of leadership, then you need a grassroots movement that does that. Sarah Schneer started the Beis Yaakov movement. She did not wait for men to sanction it.
Yes, she did.
No, she approached them to get certain certificates so that it would not be opposed. But she just did it. This is about a grassroots movement. That is one of the reasons I think that Chabad has had its success, because it's about a grassroots movement to simply get people to do one mitzvah at a time until they become more and more involved. I said before that Maimonides said that embrace the truth regardless of its source. So I want to acknowledge some of the truths I heard from other people today. and then and conclude. I agree with what Mr. Gross said, that Lord Jacobowitz was, and I had the privilege of knowing him and getting to know him quite well in the last years of his life. He was a man of great moral conviction. He was prepared to be hated and despised to take controversial positions. It's one of the reasons that Margaret Thatcher so admired him, because she too was renowned throughout the world. Whether you liked her or hated her, she would not bend. She was the Iron Lady. She would not bend for public opinion. I remember when I first arrived here in 1988, and the great question in Europe was German reunification. Germany had inflicted 2 world wars that had cost 100 million victims and 6 million Jews. And yet there was euphoria. It's over. Germany is a great friend of Israel today. Germany pays reparations to Israel. I remember listening to Lord Jacobowitz. I remember where I was in the car on Radio 4 hearing him condemn plans for German reunification, saying that this is a country that had perpetrated atrocities, the likes of which the human mind can scarcely comprehend. It didn't matter whether he was right or wrong, because thank God history has borne out that Germany today is a great friend of Israel, and Angela Merkel might just be the best friend Israel has of all European leaders. But having said that, he took a stand, and it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. So I would agree that if there is a chief rabbi who is prepared to be disliked for doing the right thing, then that is leadership. But it's not leadership that comes from a title. It's leadership that is earned. It is absolutely earned. Which is why I will conclude, because we touched on it, by saying, when the Lubavitcher Rebbe passed away, I will never forget this. Many of us who in the community flew there. Miraculously, we made it in time for the funeral, because we had 5 hours to go back on New York time. I couldn't believe how small the funeral was. See, a year or two before he died, another great Torah sage, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, had passed away, and 250,000 people were at the funeral. And then in Jerusalem, another 250,000. The Rebbe had 30, 35,000, almost all Chabad people. And it was that day that I understood his greatness. You see, the world questioned whether or not you could do new things under Jewish law. And the Rebbe was unpopular in Haredi circles. They did not come to his funeral, for the most part. I remember once that a soldier was walking up Ben Yehuda Street, and I was a young Chabad student. And I said to him in Hebrew, Chayal, soldier, did you put on tefillin today? And he said to me, I'm eating pork. In my right hand, I'm eating basar levan, pork. And you asked me to put on tefillin. I said to him, well, thank God for that, because we put on tefillin with our left hand. The idea that you could get people to do one mitzvah, that was so... Most people would tell you, you're going to put on something with tefillin or something, holding pork. You're going to get women to light Shabbos candles, and the television's going to be blaring. And he changed the Jewish world. That's the kind of innovation that has to be seen. I would argue that's one of the reasons you're seeing Chabad rabbis becoming more influential in United Synagogue circles, because of that innovation. Let me finally just say, Stephen, you're a very busy man as the editor of the Jewish Chronicle. Thank you very much. And Rabbi Schochet, you're one of the country's most influential and most admired and most loved rabbis. Thank you very much for hosting this evening at your very esteemed shul. And Sally, you and I have participated before on panels, and I fully endorse everything you're saying, that we need to make sure that women are fully Jewish in every sense, and that they become scholars and learn the Torah, because the Torah is the inheritance of every Jewish person. Thank you.
You know, there's an old Jewish expression rooted in the Talmud that a rabbi who is loved by everyone is not a good rabbi, and a rabbi who is disliked by everyone is not a good person. And the obvious resolution to this paradoxical statement is that the dual role of a rabbi is, on the one hand, to be a good person. By definition, to have a warm demeanor, to have an approachable personality. As a leader, you cannot afford to be aloof such that others can't relate to you. Invite them in closer to your soul, rather than, keeping them at arm's length by the many titles before or letters after your name. But by the same token, one has to be very firm in their resolve, such that everyone on whichever side of the fence knows exactly where you stand, even if in fact some don't like it. Sally, I wholeheartedly endorse what you're saying in terms of more needing to be done for the benefit of women in Anglo-Jewry, but I would only stress again that it always has to be done within the realm and within the specific remit of halacha. There is a lot of area that hasn't been properly explored, which should certainly be done in order to be able to benefit women to a far greater extent. And to dear Shmuley, who continuously is linking comparisons between American Jewry and Anglo-Jewry, I maintain fundamentally, having lived in both places, that they are mutually exclusive, that there are distinct differences, and that what works there doesn't necessarily work here, and vice versa. Though I do ask myself why Shmuley has been pushing the whole point on the chief rabbinate in the first instance, and I have a sneaking suspicion, as he said before, he really wants the job. Thank you.
That's a good note on which to end. Can I, on your behalf, thank our three panellists for coming, and most of all, really thank you for coming, for making this such an interesting debate or discussion. It's, as I hinted when I responded to Rabbi Schochet, it's a discussion that we're going to carry on in the pages of the JC, really throughout most of the summer. So please, it would be great if you could all contribute, whether sending letters or ideas you've got, or strong feelings you've got, or suggesting candidates even perhaps. Anyway, thank you very much for coming, and I hope to see you all soon.